Welcome to Garden Plants with Jim Putnam. Let's talk Callicarpa americana Alba. This is Callicarpa americana, and I'm just calling this Alba, which is the white berrying form. When I make the video for just Callicarpa americana with the purple berries, it's the exact same video really, because there's no real botanical difference between them other than this one gets the white berries, which are very, very showy. And the birds come after them, take them, mammals take them, it's all the same. It's all the same characteristics, great for pollinators, all the things you would get from Callicarpa americana. This particular one I got from Buddy Lee, the inventor of Encore azaleas, and it's a slightly more compact form because this can be a pretty rangy plant, and even this one has got some size on it, but really can be very rangy, especially if you put it in any kind of shade, and we'll talk about that in this video. These are native to the southeast United States and down into Mexico and a few other places even further south than that. We have limited amount of Callicarpa species in North America or on this side of the globe, but in Southeast Asia there are a lot of species of Callicarpa. So you will see some Asian Callicarpa species out in the world, and the birds seem to be just as, the bees are just as fond of the flowers and the birds are just as fond of the berries. It's really, really kind of interesting, the similarities and differences between them. These are definitely, they have larger leaves, larger berries, that kind of thing. When we see them in their native range, basically from Maryland all down to the Florida and across over to Texas, and we see a lot of these purple or, mostly purple forms, they are typically in fairly boggy areas or pine forest, lowlands, and they kind of they're choosing their own place. They're in coastal areas like that tend to be slightly more moist, but they adapt to our they adapt to our horticulture spaces just as easily. As you can see, this plant has about a 7 foot tall, 7 foot wide kind of arching habit. That's pretty typical of Callicarpa americana. Especially a selection, one that was selected to be more compact like this. They can actually get quite a bit taller. We see them 9 or even 10 feet tall and wide, especially if you put them in any kind of part shade conditions or a woodland area, which they're capable of growing in, but they tend to get rangier. But I do like the arching habit. One little interesting thing, I know there was a study about repelling mosquitoes using the leaves of the oils in the leaves on your skin, and apparently repelled ticks, fire ants, and other things as well in that study. I don't know how effective it is or if anybody's actually going to use it for something like that, but it does have some ability to repel mosquitoes. So here we are right at the end of September, almost October as we're filming this. And what's happened during the season is we cut this plant down to the ground, and I'll talk about pruning later in the video, maintenance, which is very little, but we had pruned it hard. All of this growth that you see on this plant is new this year. So it's grown approximately 6 feet in a single season from where it was cut down to about 1 foot. As those branches elongate during the season, they flower along the branch and start to form the fruit along the stem. And so they mature at different rates as they come up through the stem. The berries are fairly astringent. Not recommended that you eat any of them. They're not, you can, but they're super astringent and they apparently give you a little bit of a tummy ache, but birds and some other mammals will come along and eat them. It seems like they need to have a bit of a frost on them before this happens, before they take them. We've had a few robins in here pulling a few out of here at this point, but sometime around the time we get a first frost, mid to late October, or even early November, the cedar waxwings and the robins will just come through here and take them all at once. It's just absolutely incredible when it happens. You can see the plant just shaking around. At that point, the leaves will have dropped off of it. We'll get yellow fall color, and about as fast as that thing turns yellow, every leaf drops off of it, and then we can really see the birds taking action here and clearing out virtually every one of these off the plant. And here's a close-up. You can see the size. Some of the like Japanese beauty berries have much smaller fruit than this, so these are quite a bit more showy overall on the plant. Again, of course, typically much larger than some of the other Asian species that are sold in horticulture as well. You know, much larger plant, larger leaves, larger berries, larger everything. What I failed to mention about the flowers is they're also great for pollinators, and our native bees really love those flowers throughout the growing season, and it blooms well into the middle of summer. So a lot of our spring flowering things will have finished when the Callicarpa is really in full flower. And again, our native bees take advantage of that. These are hardy in zones 6 to 11, and I'm going to put 12 in parentheses because I've seen 12 as well. So one of the larger ranges you're ever going to see for a plant. And so it going dormant in the winter allows it to take much colder areas than its native range, where it was pushed down into the deep south. So where sun shade requirements, the more sun you put this plant in, the more compact it's going to be typically. If you put it, it will take part shade without any problem as long as it's getting some good bright light, but expect it to grow more than the 7 feet that this one has grown once it's established. That'll take 2 or 3 years. First year, second year, probably going to be a fairly compact plant regardless, but once it gets a really established root system on it, it's going to grow many feet each season, and it needs to, because that's where the flowers are, and that's where the berries are as well. So where would we use this Callicarpa americana that gets quite large every season? I like them just kind of a one-off in a cottage garden or a pollinator garden like we have here. It's just a great pollinator plant, and you know, just a great native. We have it in a spot where we can really enjoy the birds taking advantage of the berries, but not too close up to the house that we'd be bothering them. So we can kind of come out on the front porch and see it without chasing them away. Of course, they could be mass planted, you know, all kinds of uses for this plant. But again, I just kind of like this one-off approach to it with other lower things planted around it. American beauty berries are really adaptable to most soil types. So we have a clay-based soil here in Raleigh. Again, when I see them in their native range, they're in sandier soils in the eastern part of the state. They don't seem to really have any problem. The pH just doesn't seem to matter as much. Probably slightly acidic would be overall best. One thing that we do on this particular plant is we are giving it a little bit of water when it becomes abnormally dry. While I would say that this is an extremely drought tolerant plant once it's established. This one's 3 years in the ground, and we went 6 weeks without rain earlier this season and really hot temperatures. It would not have killed this plant, but it would not look like this in late September with as good as this foliage looks and as good as these berries look on here. It would not look like this if we had not given it some additional water during that extremely dry time earlier in the season. So keep that in mind. Sometimes when we say something is drought tolerant, it doesn't mean that if you have abnormal conditions sometime during the summer, or you know, heat that's much higher than normal, that kind of thing, that plant's going to necessarily live its best life. It's just going to survive because it's drought tolerant. But this one, you know, probably 5 or 6 times during that extremely dry period of time, this one got some water, and then we got back to some fairly normal rainfall. Haven't had to water it since, and it still looks great this time of year. I think if we hadn't have done that, it'd probably be crispy looking at this point, and far less attractive here in the fall garden. Maintenance on Callicarpa americana is pretty much leave it alone, except for one time of year. We actually cut this thing down to about 1 foot in height right before it starts to leaf out in the spring. So sometime around March, we'll just come in here and just literally cut the thing to about 12 inches in height. You do not have to do that. It does not have to be pruned at all, but keep in mind all the flowering and all the fruit set that's on here all happened on new growth this year. So it would have to get bigger than whatever it is. As you're looking at it coming out of winter, if it's 6 feet tall and you're expecting it to do this, it's going to have to get 9 feet tall in order for that to happen. So for us, it's just easier to reset it. Even if you weren't doing this reset pruning, probably the canes that are in it that are oldest, and you'll be able to tell the difference by how the old canes coming up out of the ground will be kind of gnarly. I would cut those to the ground regardless. So if you were just going to do selective pruning and not the whole plant to the ground like we do, you would take out about 1/3 of the wood each winter, the oldest canes. And again, you'll be able to identify those pretty easy because they'll be a little bit gnarly after about 3 years in the ground. This is a plant to not push. You know, we get these 1,000 fertilizer recommendations for, for horticulture, and, everybody wants to sell you something somewhere. And I've always been, I've always said we fertilize very little in this garden. This is a plant I'd fertilize even less than I fertilize, which is almost nothing. The more you push this thing, the more likely it is to get leggy, the more likely it is to get floppy during the season. So we just don't, this is not a plant to push because you will get a ton of green growth that the first rains will be flopping it over. Even with the limited amount of fertilizer I've given this thing, our soil's so rich here, even this one's a little bit floppy, but certainly nowhere near what I've seen, out in the world. So, a limited amount of fertilizer. We just keep the weeds away from it. When it gets cut to the ground, we mulch around it, and that's it. There's very little maintenance, very few pests for this plant. But I definitely think this is one of our great natives, and whether you're getting a purple berried version or the white like this one is, doesn't really matter. They're great plants for pollinators, great plants for birds, great plants, a few other mammals that will take these berries as well. Great fall color, interesting arching habit, kind of a great 12-month plant, and one of our great native plants. So thank you guys so much for following along.